Hey Chris, welcome to the podcast.
G'day, Ryan. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. You mentioned you're in the Northern Beaches in the moment.
Yeah, I live up at Bilgola, which no one really knows where that is, but it's just next to Avalon, sort of up on a bit of a peninsula, about sort of 45 to an hour away from the city, depending on the run. But yeah, it's a good spot.
Lovely. Do you find the commutes quite challenging, or is it pretty straightforward? And
I've got it set up pretty good. I've got two young kids, so I sort of work from home a lot and only go in one, sometimes 2 days a week. So that makes it manageable. It's a bit of a hard place to commute sort of 5 days. People do it, but I wouldn't sort of recommend it. But I mean, the world's changed a lot over the last sort of 5, 6 years now, right? So yeah, and I think the way the customers and teams and want to work allows sort of that flexibility sort of approach much more for a lot more people. So yeah, I think it's one of the best things for where we live up here is that people can still have a corporate job, and not have to get to the city 5 days, but then at the end of the day live in a area that's really lifestyle driven rather than sort of city driven, I guess, beaches and schools and community and kids. And yeah, that's why we love it up here.
that's great. Do you find it's become more popular, the hybrid model or the remote working? Definitely, well, I suppose definitely remote working, but the hybrid model after the pandemic?
Big conversation I always try to track and, not get too certain on where it's going to go because I think a lot of it's due to the economy. It's due to sort of, how strong the jobs market is. And, in different industries will probably be dealing in different ways, right? And so I just sort of talk to clients and sort of figure out what they're doing and chat to friends and, and try to understand what work policies are shifting. Obviously, it went from, work from home forever or work anywhere in the world to maybe you've got to come to the office 1, 2 days and then, to firms all demanding people to get back 5 days, right? And, even in the tech space, which I think you are as well, that's quite common. So, yeah, obviously the power's back with the employer, but, I think there's always challenges in global cities, not just Sydney, where, the affordability of housing that suits the workers is obviously out of reach for a lot of the talent coming through, and they have a real challenge in trying to find a solution for their family and their and that being in a commutable distance. So it's hard for talent to get a property that suits them, and they're having to go further afield, whether it's an hour or two away from the capital city. And so I think there's going to be a real challenge for employers to get people back into the office sort of 5 days, because I do think as the job market, over years gets stronger and talent just won't be able to afford properties that, are commutable, to the city. And I think, companies grow due to the talent that they've got, and they're going to need these workers.
Yeah, brilliant, Chris. That's a bit of a. And is that the same as, I know that's based in Sydney, is that the same in other cities in Australia, or is this mainly Sydney focused? And
I think Sydney's got the biggest pressure cooker effect just due to affordability. And, it's a very interesting city in terms of, how it's structured, right? We're on the coast, which basically lose half of the housing because it's blue water. Then you've got, a harbour and you've got rivers and you've got, and it's kind of clogged up. You've had really good NIMBYism over the last 20, 30 years where we really were anti-development as a city, and we'd push all our development into a few west or northwest or southwest, or you'd build high-rise in certain pockets. But that is shifting. We can't. That model just wasn't working, and in New South Wales, they are building a lot more housing in the inner ring, which is upsetting a lot of people. But I think it's the only way the city can sort of evolve. It had a huge issue. People were leaving Sydney because there was no hope for them around a housing. But lesser extent in Brisbane, but Brisbane's had a huge run in recent years. I mean, places like Adelaide and Perth, I think it's less of a concern, even though they have gone up in prices. And Melbourne, I think the hybrid work and getting the mojo back to get people to the city just hasn't been as strong. And it's been a bit of a laggard in lots of ways. But yeah, but it's got the same fundamental issues as Sydney. The roads do get clogged up there, and you can only get so many people on trains. And there has been major congestion issues in the past in Melbourne. I think it'll happen once the city gets its mojo back.
yeah, yeah, thanks for sharing, Chris. I noticed the trains are great here as well. the metro and the trains in Sydney. It's super helpful to get around.
Yeah, I mean that's all very new, right? So a lot of people haven't probably even been on the metro. There was a northwest link that went from sort of Chatswood all the way up into Castle Hill Way, which people have been benefiting from that. I'm not sure when it was open, 2019, I think, but for 5 years people were getting into the city, and it really opened up the ability to live up that. It's a really nice pocket up towards Castle Hill, very leafy, flatter blocks, really established sort of communities, and that train really made a difference. But it really sort of took off when the next stage opened, which sort of went from Chatswood all the way through the city and down towards the sort of southwest. It's still got stations still to open, and they spent a lot of money building that. It's very expensive to build new infrastructure like that, but they're fully committed to building a new West Line as well, all the way out to basically Parramatta, and a number of stops along that. So yeah, when that one opens, maybe in sort of it'll probably get delayed a number of years, but sort of somewhere in the 2030s. It will mean that anyone who wants to work in any of the major work hubs around Sydney, like you're really just a metro stop away. So if you can get to a metro pretty easy, it'll really allow workers to be quite flexible on job opportunities rather than before kind of really restricted into where they could get to easily to and from in the daytimes.
Yeah, definitely. I've also heard about a new terminal opening as well, or a new airport in Sydney.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, it's not many often you see major cities around the world open up, major airports. It's not just like a sort of smaller one. It'll serve Western Sydney's just a huge. It's kind of like one of the things. Don't quote me on this, but it's one of the biggest cities in Sydney. If you classify Western Sydney as an economy, and in there not only just business and services and development and construction and the list goes on, and the airport's going to really open up a lot of opportunities for industries to sort of export and import, and stop a lot of people in Western Sydney having to travel all the way basically to the city to fly out. And yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's been a major project in the works, and a lot of people but it was in the works for a long time, for decades. A lot of people bought, around there thinking this new airport was going to happen, and absolutely, it's not that far away, I believe.
Brilliant, brilliant. And hope you don't mind. We may get into a bit of an introduction, kind of before we hop into your story, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Just go on to Google Gemini. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in anything I say here. Chris Bates is a prominent Australian mortgage broker and CEO and co-founder of Alcove, a strategic mortgage advice firm launched in August 2025. He is widely recognized for his educational presence on LinkedIn and his work with high-income families and property investors. Professional background, current role, CEO and co-founder of Alcove, formerly part of Fint and Blusk/Wealthful. Previous ventures, Flint co-launched in early 2024 with Christian Stevens before the two parted ways in 2025. Blusk, formerly Wealthful, founded in 2014, originally as a joint financial advice and mortgage brokerage. Corporate experience, spent many years at CBA 2007 to 2024 across ComSec, Colonial First State and private banking. Education and early career, started as a financial advisor in the UK in 2007 before returning to Australia in 2012 to focus on advising young families. Media and podcasts. Chris is a frequent commentator on property strategy and hosts several popular podcasts: the Elephant in the Room podcast, the Australian Property Podcast with Owen Rask, Street Secrets, industry recognition. He is one of the most awarded brokers with recent accolades, including 2024 ranked number one elite broker by The Advisor, 2024 ranked number 3 in the MPA Top 100 Brokers, 2023 winner of Residential Broker of the Year and Broker of the Year at Australian Broker Awards. Strategic approach. Unlike traditional transaction-focused brokers, Bates emphasized, quote, mortgage strategy, end quote. His firm, Alcove, focuses on helping high-income families manage long-term property portfolios, borrowing capacity and life goals, rather than just securing the lowest interest rates. I think that's it. Hopefully that's...
So funny. I'm not really a Gemini user too much, right? I've just sort of been in the Chat GPT club. Not to say that one's better than the other, but It was pretty right. I mean, I definitely didn't work at ComSec and CBA, so I don't know what's going on there with Google. But the rest was pretty accurate, yeah, sort of did highlight the difference that we do take here as a firm. Really, it's been the same company since 2014. We have had a few different name changes as every business sort of evolves and grows, yeah. Yeah, so the business has been going since 2014, but we're currently branded as Alcove.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. And I'd love to know if you don't mind me asking, what was growing up like in Australia, and how did you get into the current position that you're in business?
Yeah, I think everyone's on a journey, right? I think I grew up in Australia in Newcastle with English parents, and my parents migrated here in the 80s. And my dad was in the Air Force, and we were first 5 years in Melbourne. Don't really remember it, but with English parents and grandparents, and then from 5 to sort of 20 or 5 to 18, sorry, I was up in Newcastle, and it was Newcastle's a pretty great city of Australia. I was sort of very fortunate to grow up there, and it's sort of gentrified and changed a lot. It was basically like a country town when I grew up there. Everyone did know everyone, and yeah, but I mean, it was sun, and played a lot of football, as in soccer and sports, and yeah, I think it's very thankful. My parents did move from Liverpool in the UK, but no, I've got a very good, strong connection to England as well, and a lot of family over there, and a big Liverpool fan.
Have you supporting this season as well? Are you following along,
Let's
or?
talk about 2026, 2025. We can talk about that. And very painful for a Liverpool fan right now. But yeah, we have won the league, which we didn't win for the first 30 years of my support. So we have won it a couple of times in recent years. So that monkey's off our back.
Yeah, yeah. And I'd love to know, Chris, then what about schooling and then education after, and then getting into business?
Look, I mean, I went to, public school, had a couple of years at a sort of a Christian college, which was probably not my cup of tea. Yeah, I mean, I was from an early age, I think my brain was probably wired a little bit different to some others. And, a very much I don't know, I guess of an independent thinker. I very much challenged the way of, status quo, and also knew that you had to sort of kind of create the life you want. Life wouldn't just be served to you, and so that led me to start a number of businesses when I was in high school. I moved out of home when I was 18. I moved to Sydney, I moved to London. I've lived all over sort of Sydney, Melbourne, London, and I think it was all about me just sort of trying to explore and find my way in the world, and figure out I knew I wanted to do something that was quite meaningful, that I would get a lot of not only challenge out of it, but I knew that I was making a positive impact in the world. And that sent me down, firstly, in a typical sort of, I was very good at numbers, not in an arrogant way, it was just my skill, and sent me down an accounting sort of investment route, which just wasn't exciting enough for me. And then I moved out through a bit of a financial advice journey. The advice world back in mid 2007 to 2010 was quite challenged. It was very much a sales industry that was pretending to be an advice industry. The last 15 years, it's sort of been trying to get itself out of that and become a true trusted profession. And, I went through all that in the UK, and also went through that in Australia. And it was a real challenge for me because I loved what we did, but I also hated that the industry wasn't focusing on client outcomes. And then I realized the biggest thing that I could help people with was their biggest financial decisions, was actually around, in Australia, it's actually around property. And so once I sort of understood that back in 2012, I basically spent the last, whatever you call it, 13, 14 years, 100% obsessing on, how do I help people make good decisions there? Not just from a finance point of view and how they structure it, but, a good life decision, something that's actually going to set them up for the future. Because in Australia, that's where vast majority of wealth is in residential properties, in people's homes or in their investments. And, there's a story that you'll hear at the barbecue where people have made a lot of money, but there's a lot of people that don't do that well. And I think what I want to do is just make sure every client that, works with us or listens to our podcasts, makes more advice and better decisions, because the market's completely unregulated. Like a a lot of industries have, there's real strict rules on what you can and can't say. I think people don't probably realise that there's a real incentive for the government to not regulate property, and that means that you've got to be extremely careful what you believe and who you listen to, because there's no one basically policing it.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating. Is that's for all of Australia you serve, or just Sydney with regards to
Yeah,
the?
look, we're fortunate because in broking, bank policy is the same across the country. It's very hard for certain other parts of the property journey to be, Australia wide. Conveyancing's hard. Buyers agency's really hard. Real estate agent, you can't be a national real estate agent. But for brokers, yeah, we can serve a national sort of clientele, and that's awesome for us, because then we also get to learn about different cities. I know Melbourne really well. I've got business partners in Brisbane. We've got team members, particularly on the eastern states, in Melbourne, Brisbane, and obviously in Sydney as well. And so, we serve clients all over the country. The same fundamentals do apply, the same issues that you've got in Sydney are sort of issues that are happening in Brisbane and Melbourne. And we can sort of, because we're not advising clients to, hey, buy this property on this street. We sort of talk a macro view first, and then, this is some of the benefits of looking at different cities. That was on mute.
No worries, all good.
So we take a bit of a macro view. We look at sort of different cities, and then once we decide with the client what's the right move for them, they might have just wanted to buy a house where they live in Brisbane, for example. We would then work with super experienced buyers agents in that city if a client can afford it, basically. And someone who's been buying in that market for 10, 20 years, who knows all the suburbs and the streets and what's gentrifying and where not to buy. And we play a strategy role, figuring out what's the right property move, and then we go, hey, to make that happen, you need to know the local market, and the best way to do that's a local buyer's agent.
Brilliant. And I'd love to know, is it very different from London as well? You said you mentioned, excuse me, you used to live there. The property market very different, and the way things are structured, and from the UK versus Australia.
I think it is the same fundamentals, supply and demand would, and properties that are more scarce and, that are better to live in, that offer a greater lifestyle benefit, would be worth more than others, right? So you could apply the same fundamentals across really any city in the world. However, there's always elements, there's all these other factors, whether it's, government policy, changes to economies and migration and borrowing capacity and what drives certain prices. And so, for example, you've got to be really aware of how those things are changing. In London, just at the moment, there's some major changes to things like stamp duty, and it's really affecting, that market, particularly higher price properties. And so, fundamentals really do apply. You could, but you wouldn't be able to get up to speed in a local market, I don't think, until you really understand all the other elements and everything from zoning and demographics and where wealth is. And so it takes years, and I think that's what's interesting about the property market. I think, in Sydney, for example, there's been a major shift around zoning in the last, 12 months. A lot of people just flick past that, in the papers, but I know that that's a huge shift. It's changing things that will, in 5 years' time, everyone will be like, wow, it's actually so much nicer to live here now versus here, and I didn't know that was going to happen. But so you've just always got to be on understanding how things are changing, and government policy, around incentives. That there's a huge shift in first-home buyer changes all the way back to the election last year. People just didn't really understand so many other policies that affect people, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it hits the news. This is changing in October. Well, yeah, it was announced in May, and that's affecting prices dramatically. And so, there is. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to know if there's any key trends within Sydney or Australia that you're seeing that can maybe, if there's anyone listening that's looking to buy their first property or maybe their second, or I'd love to know, is there any trend you're seeing as well? You already mentioned some of them, but is there anything that maybe you didn't touch or talk about?
Look, the housing crisis is on many levels, and it will just always get kicked down the road because it's not one policy or one change that they can fix it. It's it's decades of structural failings, to be honest. And, when you've got sort of a $12 trillion housing market in Australia right now, it's too big to fail. And at 12, you think about what people have got in superannuation and got in other assets, it's nothing compared. And so it's highly incentivized to, that's what makes Australia wealthy, is our Australian residential property market. Even our commercials sort of a drop in the ocean in comparison. So you've got to understand where incentives are from governments, and also just the way that governments work in terms of short cycles. No one's really ever going to deal with the problem. And so, and they just keep kicking the can down the road. And I think that's the overall thing just to understand, is that how it fits into the Australian economy. Trends. If you're a first home buyer right now, the incentives around a 5% deposit. I started back in broking in 2013. That is the most advantageous policy I've ever seen by far. Basically allows you to buy any property up to a certain price cap in a capital city, and that price cap's gone up dramatically in the last 4 months. So about 1.5 million in Sydney, $1 million, let's say, in Melbourne, Brisbane, and a little bit lower than that in other areas. So that means that 90% of apartments are probably under that. Not all houses. Houses are a challenge in, say, Sydney, but in other parts of Australia, potentially you can get into the housing market. So, you can buy basically not just new property. The problem with old government schemes is they all force people to buy new property, which often are, have been the worst performing properties. You can go into that, but governments were massively incentivized to basically fund the development industry and the construction industry. And the way they did that is they got first home buyers to buy new property. And that was the old model, but the new 5% deposit schemes allows you to buy just new and old property. So you can buy much better assets. There's stamp duty concessions often in lots of states as well for first home buyers, not as attractive as the limits on the 5% deposit. And before they would say, hey, it's, which is probably the right move, to be honest, have an income cap on it. If you earn over a certain income, you're not eligible for the scheme. They've removed that. And so that basically means that, even higher income, sort of younger first home buyers who haven't bought yet aren't ineligible for this scheme. And, we've got a lot of clients in that space, like me, I was in my 20s. I want to explore, take advantage of those years before the kids come along. And I'm glad I did. And, people have prioritized experience and travel and, all the fun things that you want to do as you sort of can explore the world. But then at some point, even though you're earning a high income, you haven't really got much to show for it. But at some point, they do flick that switch and they're like, no, I want to take advantage of, the hard work I've done, and I want to start getting ahead. And so people can pretty much jump that really fast now. They can go, well, I only need a 5% deposit. I'm on a really good income, and then I can enter the market. However, there are issues with that because, the market will basically get dominated by the people who are earning medium and higher incomes. And that's been happening for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's making it even harder for middle and lower incomes to buy. But yeah, that's unfortunately, that's what the government's done, and it's affecting prices. The second, third properties, there's always a belief that it's really easy to be a property investor in Australia. You can buy lots and lots of properties. That's a bit of a myth. It's way harder than it was 2014, 15, much, much, much harder. But there was a loophole that was getting pushed around content and, mortgage brokers over the last 12 months, where it was like trust lending, and, the banks were sort of in on it as well. And, there's a huge growing buyer's agency world that was taking advantage of this loophole. We didn't. We could see the writing was on the wall for it, and it wasn't the right move for clients. However, all the banks got found out and have had to pull trust lending back dramatically. And I think overall there's a consensus of trying to target investors in Australia and say that they're the problem, not the structural imbalance that the government's created. And so the negative of that is it's going to force people to get harder and harder to buy investment properties. There's going to be more and more taxes. Capital gains tax is back on the agenda. Land tax is increased dramatically in states like Victoria. And it's going to funnel people back to buying homes rather than buying investments, which people are going to say that's great because you're going to have less investors buying what first-home buyers would buy. That's true, but you're also going to have less rental accommodation. And the issue with a country like Australia is we're a high growth migration society, culture and economy. That's the system we've built, and that's not going to change. So we're having high migration with a tighter and tighter rental supply. It's only going to unfortunately cause one thing, which is a real increase in rental costs, and we're going to have a rental crisis, which we've already got because vacancy rates around the country are really low. Rents have been going up dramatically over the last 5 years. They didn't really go up when we had a building boom in 2015 for investors. And so any anti-investor move is only going to create a worsening rental crisis. So, that's kind of a big trend. And so what you're going to see is that's going to push up properties that are really suitable to people wanting to own them, to live in them, and properties that really suit just investors and aren't that great to live in isn't going to be where the demand's going to go. Demand's going to go to often a lot of couples and families and in properties that really are lovely to live in and in areas that are, offer great lifestyle benefits.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that, Chris. It seems as though there are similarities. I don't want to make this about Ireland, but there are similarities in Ireland about there is a housing crisis, and the rents are quite high in Dublin, the capital city, which would be similar to Sydney. But I'd love to know as well, if you mentioned there's a high migration for anyone moving to Sydney over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. Is there anything they could look into, or is there anything? I know you have a podcast, but is there anything they should maybe keep top of mind if they're looking to buy property here? Or I suppose I think that's the question.
Look, it is hard when you haven't got sort of around visas and permanent residency, and so just be really sort of clear around that and understanding how that changes for you and how fast you can get permanent residency, and does that allow you to and if you've got job opportunities and one's maybe giving you a higher chance of permanent residency, you might want to factor that in to your decision, particularly if it's not just going to be a short-term move and it's going to be a long-term move. Look, if you're just coming for a couple of years to enjoy, but ultimately going to end up home because that's where your family are and that's where you want to raise a family, then you maybe need to be less concerned, and you'll still be able to rent something. It's not like you're not going to be able to rent something. Unfortunately, the people that are really struggling are the people that aren't working or are single, worker families, and the older age. These are the ones who are kind of the ones that are really getting hit from the rental crisis. If you've got a job and you're on a good income, you'll be top of the list, unfortunately. Fortunately for you, but unfortunately for those other people who get basically marginalised. And so don't be fearful of coming to Sydney thinking you can't have a rent. That's not going to be the case. And it's an amazing city, I would say. I think Australia's, if you think about the economy over the next few decades, we're sort of piggybacking off sort of Asia, and and I think it's climate and climate change, and I do think there's a lot of prosperity, and it's a great country to live in, and crime and safety and all the things that you'd probably want from a lifestyle point of view. And so if you can manage a way where you can be a job and raise a family, and and I do think there's options with housing. It's just you've got to potentially just be a little bit willing to look at different options and make certain compromises. Particularly if you've got a job that can be quite flexible with commutes. You can there's once you start getting an hour to two away from the city, the property options dramatically increase.
That's fascinating. Would that be outside the metro or still within the metro?
Look, it depends on what you want, what lifestyle you love. If you love mountains, you can live up in the Blue Mountains. But a lot of people don't like mountains and cold, so they might want to go north up the Central Coast or Newcastle or somewhere in the middle there at Lake Macquarie. Like, these are still affordables for capital city incomes to buy up there. And, they're great places to raise families, for example. Or if you go south towards Wollongong or, down towards sort of that Shoalhaven region, there's plenty of options as well. And there's still going to be sort of, not to say, developers are getting much more pressure on building a quality product. And so I was very concerned around the quality of products coming to market over, 2015 to 2020. I was very putting it out there. I used to get a lot of heat from the construction industry because I was sort of, raising a lot of concerns around not just asset quality, but also the quality of the assets they were building. And that's shifted a lot over the last 5 years. They've innovated in massive ways, everything from the materials they're using to the building quality in terms of, the craftsmanship and the livability of buildings, and thinking about weather and climate and sustainability. And it's pretty exciting when you look at the city we're building and how we've shifted from maybe let's put them up as quick as we can, doesn't matter what we're building, to actually let's build stuff that's A, great to live in, and B, is really adding value to the suburb at a streetscape and communities, rather than, creating, lots of other challenges.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see the amount of construction here as well in Sydney. You mentioned the asset quality, but the amount of construction building going on.
Yeah, it feels a lot. It's nowhere near like it was, say, back in 2015. Like you might see it because you see lots of, but there is a lot of residential stuff coming. And the construction industry, there's a competition for resources, everything from materials to labour. It's Olympics coming in, up in Brisbane. Governments really spent a lot of money coming into COVID and coming out of COVID, and to prop up job markets and their economy, whether it's, roads or rail or sporting venues, the list goes on. A lot of that stuff's starting to slow down, I would say, and we're going to move into a bit of a residential sort of housing boom, particularly in Sydney and even in Brisbane, I would say. Melbourne's a bit of a laggard down there, but, once prices go up down there, which will probably happen over the next few years, I'd imagine. Don't hold me to that. But I think you'll find a construction boom follows Melbourne as well.
Yeah, that's great. There's plenty of jobs in the construction space.
Yeah.
In the over the next over the next number of years.
Yeah.
And
Yes, if you're in Ireland and you got a construction job, I don't think you're going to have any issues in Australia. And the Irish and the Australians, I do think we get along quite well. I think we've got a love of life, I would say.
yeah, definitely. I saw that the Ireland are playing Australia in rugby union here on July 4th. I think they're going to be playing in the Allianz Stadium.
Yeah. And I'm sure they're not just all in Coogee, by the way. We've got a lot of Irish clients, all over Australia. I would say one of my longest term clients is Irish, and massive Liverpool fan. Shout out to you, Ryan. And, I love chatting to him. And they're all over Australia as well. It's particularly, so it's I think if you're thinking about moving to Australia, you're from Ireland, I think you'll find there's lots of friends here for you from your homeland.
Yeah, brilliant. I'd love to know with the family as well. I suppose this is probably one of the last questions I'll ask around this, but just moving here with the family, do you reckon it's a lot different to moving here as maybe someone that's single and setting up and rent, or is it a very similar process?
Look, I think obviously the visas and work, and you've got to be very conscious of, because isn't it not a cheap place to live? And so, does that mean that both parties have to work? Can both parties work on your visa? And is the job prospects good for one, or is it good for both? I think once you're here, though, schooling, is a pretty good level, and so I think, and there's childcare and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. I think it's a great place to raise a family, personally. Not that I've raised a family anywhere else in the world. So, but I think having young kids is hard. I would say, one of the challenges would be if all your help is back in Ireland. But that challenge isn't forever. I think it's, even if you've got family members close by, when you've got, one, you can sort of pass the pass it around a little bit, get your rugby in or get your golf in or, your running in or, whatever your sort of thing is that you love to do for yourself. With one. Two gets a bit hard, particularly if you've got no help and all your family's back in Ireland. So, obviously you want to be conscious of that. But, I've got a 4 and a 5-year-old, and that's getting much easier for us. So the window isn't, it feels like it's never going to end in terms of, but yeah. And even if you've got family that are close, if you're thinking about having a family, you've got parents that will absolutely help out a lot, and then you'll get parents that are keen at start, and then they start to back off as they get a little bit bigger as well. And you might not get as help as much as you think. And so, yeah. But, we've got friends that have got, particularly around us, who've got, they're all in the same boat. And they basically got babysitter sort of clubs, they all bound together. Look, we're all here. We've got no family close by. Let's work together as a team. And, they'll sort of share, I'll help out here, you help out here. And they, I think that works for them.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. I'd love to know as well within your industry. I'm talking about this a number of times in the podcast, the rise of AI. Is there much of a shift, or have you noticed any sort of introductions? Or feel free not to talk about it if you don't want to. But
no, happy to talk about it. Look, I think as you clock up the years, you realise what you know, and you realise I was going to swear, but I won't. But a lot you don't know, and I think with AI, I'm going to raise the flag. I don't know what I know. I use it a hell of a lot, though. I'm constantly talking to, it's ChatGPT. I haven't got an expert on other platforms, and I'm not sort of, head under the sand thinking that, it's not going to get dramatically better, and naive to think. Unfortunately, a lot of the broker industry feel like this, is that their value proposition is no way anyone's ever going to work with that, and clients need me, and and I'm safe, and I've got nothing to worry about. I'm not in that boat. I'm on the other side of the fence and going, look, I think it's something that we need to be playing with, we need to be learning, we need to be integrating into our process, and testing, and there's huge benefits even now. We've got it across our business in lots of ways, everything from transcribing calls, to creating notes, to helping us with strategies, to, looking at our data across our clients. There's so many things that we're using for it already. And I do think the broking world's got a real challenge, and people have got to be very conscious of where AI really helps and where their value add works with AI, rather than, thinking it's just going to be computer or old way. I do think there's this sort of hybrid world, we're really excited about it. We're not a firm that just goes and pumps money into building tech, but we have got more different tools than I'd like, and we constantly are trying new tools. And to be honest, we're quite excited by it. It allows us to take away a lot of the admin, everyday work, and focus on conversations with clients, which is where our skill set is helping people make decisions. It's super exciting in my view. And it's hugely valuable for me. Everything from having better conversations with my boy, who's just obsessed with nature and animals, through to relationships, through to just problems around the house, through to business. Like, I use it for anything that I'm finding I've got a mental block on. I'll just talk to ChatGPT, and I'm not blindly following it, but I do think it helps me thinking about being more productive, not just with work but life.
Yeah, that's great, Chris. Thanks for getting into AI a bit. And I suppose we've, I think, 2 minutes left, so I'd love to know if you'd go back to your former self. Is there any words of wisdom you give maybe 10 years ago, maybe in London, or maybe someone, or maybe when you're in Sydney? Is there anything you'd say? Or
So 10 years ago, I'm 39, just turned 39, so I've been
or maybe 20
29.
years, yeah,
Yeah.
29, or yeah.
10 years ago, I just started the business, back in, end of mid 2014. I was actually doing all the right things there. I was taking risk at an age pre-family, and trying to invest really in, trying to build a business. And it was quite scary, starting a firm at that age. And while I had a lot of friends still focusing on lifestyle, I was sort of going, right, I need to really get on top of this because at some point I'm going to meet someone. And I was single at that time, and I was trying to build something for a family. I think it was highly stressful at that point in time. I think you've got to just be quite patient. You've got to know that if you do the right things and you look after customers and you, really improve your value proposition in any industry every day, that will become more valuable because, it's a lot of people, they don't. And you'll find that that'll compound for you. So the advice I would be is just be patient. Don't have anxiety around the future as much, and just commit to your craft. But make sure it's aligned to something that you genuinely care about and something that really adds value to society, and that's something that you're placed to your skill set as well. And and take risk, because sometimes you've got to. That's where you learn the most. So I would say that to a 29-year-old. A 19-year-old, I would say, just go enjoy yourself and see the world, which is what I did, to be honest. And I think nothing taught me more than, moving to London when I was 20, traveling a lot in my mid-20s, not just to the typical sort of countries a 20-year-old goes to, but to India and Africa and different parts of Asia, and seeing the world and understanding that it's not all where you grew up. And I think that teaches you a lot of gratitude, and it also teaches you a lot of understanding of your place within the world. And I think that, will be one of the most valuable things you can have as you get older is feeling, to center you, I guess. But I don't know. Hopefully that helps, Ryan. I don't know if it's, I wasn't expecting that question.
Helps a lot. No, it's great. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today. And I think we're just at the hour mark now. And yeah, I think it is, if someone was to look to reach out for your services or business or your podcast, is there anywhere you'd recommend? Is there one place to go to find you, or?
Yeah, reach out to the team. Look, we've got, very quickly we can understand whether we can help. I do speak to clients as well. It's a few steps till they get to me. But absolutely. I mean, you're in a very safe hands with our team. And, one of the things you highlighted was, back in, we had a few brand names. That was me just pivoting the business to the longer term direction. But we did go through a challenging year and a business merger and a demerger within basically 10 months. And, the thing that was the biggest challenge is we sort of, our culture sort of got smashed in that period. And, 2025 was rebuilding that because, for us, it's, we're all a little bit older, our team, sort of, not to say that, 22, not to say you can't add value to the world at 22, but we do value life experience, and we're all very family driven and, very much at a sort of that stage of life, or either having kids or, younger kids. And so, if you're at that sort of stage of life as well, you're in sort of safe hands where we get it and we understand that a lot going on for you. And we can sort of help you navigate those challenges of family, work, life, and property decisions.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And I suppose LinkedIn is the best place to reach out, or is there?
Yeah, LinkedIn, jump on the website, check out some pods. A lot of people do that. I mean, you sort of, any profession in your life, not only you want to make sure someone's got the knowledge and they care and they apply that knowledge and they're actually seen as a trusted advisor, but you got to like who you work with. Life's too short to work with people you don't connect with. So, yeah, if you listen to those and read, you might find whether we're your people.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Ryan.
Appreciate
Good to
the
chat.
time.
Enjoyed it.
Likewise. See you later.
See you, mate.
Thanks a lot.